And so the good news is the January forecast was actually right on. So there's another indication that, maybe we've bounced off the bottom, and, Dr. Raha has finally caught up with reality, and, and better days are ahead. But that's about $1.8 billion of revenue that wasn't there that, the budget had been built on. And then the other thing, of course, that happens is in a recession, there's a lot more demand for government services, whether it's employment help or, emergency health care or whatever it might be. And so we were seeing increased caseloads in our human services and social services areas, and that was driving costs. And there were a few other miscellaneous things, and that's essentially, how you get to another $2.6 to $2.8 billion that you've got to solve in the supplemental session. Now, the other part that complicates it, of course, is that, before the Recovery Act, 60% of our state budget was essentially off limits to any cuts because it's constitutionally specified what you're going to do with that money or required by the federal government. The Recovery Act money then had some maintenance of efforts requirements that took another 10% of the budget off the table. So, the governor and the legislature essentially left with 30% of the total budget that they can access to solve that $2.8 billion problem. So $9.3 billion of budget to solve $2.8 billion of problem, that's pretty severe. So that's what they've all been faced with. The governor's proposal essentially is shown in this slide. So her solution to this problem was about $1 billion of cuts, additional cuts in programs and services that the state provides, $600 million of new revenue, and she proposed that in sort of a collection of things that she thought would add up to that revenue picture. There's some legislation or some legal issues around current tax law that she proposed to clear up and generate $150 million. And then some more one-time things to get to about another $680 million. So the governor sort of rolled out that proposed solution, and ever since then, which was about, 6-8 weeks ago, the legislature has been struggling with, okay, what are we going to do? And so, I think that's where we find ourselves. They're trying to figure out, how much revenue to raise and how, if they're going to do that, and then what that means for the budget. And then there's a third topic, which is jobs. And so that's going to segue me to the next part of my presentation, which is jobs. What are we doing about jobs? The governor actually had a set of proposals that she brought into the session about how to create jobs in the short term, relatively short term, being the next year to 2 to 3 years. And the theme around that is how do we motivate private capital investment? The recovery that most people think the recovery we've seen to date has largely been driven by public spending, and that there's a bunch of private capital sitting on the sidelines waiting for, waiting to get in and waiting for a signal that convinces them that it's time to invest. And if we don't get that private capital off the sidelines, we don't have a recovery. I mean, one of the first things I realized taking this job is that 80% of our state's economy is private sector driven. So, you don't get the private sector going, you don't recover. And so we put a series of proposals in place to try to stimulate that private investment. The first one was something called projects of statewide significance. It essentially said for projects of a certain size, certain amount of capital investment, and a certain threshold of ongoing employment when they were done, the state should offer a B&O tax credit of 5% of the total capital cost of the project. That credit would be taken in out years, so it wouldn't impact this budget session. And we thought that could motivate some big projects that I know are out there because I see them in my job. And if we could just help the economics a little bit more on those projects, that might make them go sooner rather than later. So that was the first thing. The second one was a small business credit for hiring full-time employees. So, I know that, any new employee for a small business is a significant commitment. It's, you have just the things you owe the government if you hire an employee for workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, all those things, make that decision a non-trivial one. So the proposal is let's at least try to offset those costs to the government by saying if you hire a new full-time employee, if you're a business under a certain size and you hire a new full-time employee and keep them on for a year, then you'll be eligible for a tax credit to try to help push people over the decision point and go ahead and make that new hire. You know, the governor wants to create a clean energy business development effort in my department, and we're going to do that. There was a proposal to extend the time horizon for doing energy efficiency work in public buildings, and we thought that could create more jobs and get our public building stock upgraded faster. There are incentives to do more hiring in rural and distressed counties. There's a sales and use tax exemption for distressed counties that we want to try to continue. There's also a threshold if you're in a rural setting and you increase your employment base by a certain percentage, you're eligible for a tax credit. That threshold is 15% increase right now. We'd like to lower that to 10%. I know that would impact companies like Areva here in Richland that are looking at a consolidation that would raise their employment and would love to have some economic help doing that. So all of those things and a few others were part of the governor's proposal. And what I would say is that the statewide significance one is not looking good right now. So, I think if you know of big capital projects that would benefit from that, I'd encourage you to contact your legislators. Right now, it seems like the two biggest ideas in the legislature are Hans Dunshee has a big proposal around energy efficiency in public buildings called the Jobs Act that would bond, the state would borrow money, to the tune of several $100 million to fund accelerating energy efficiency work in public buildings. And then the small business hiring tax credit, I think, is still very much in play. So those are the biggest ones. There have been some other bills done in the session that I think will impact jobs, sooner. One in the data center area, a couple other smaller ones. But I'll be candid. I'm disappointed that the number one thing here is not looking like it's going to happen. But we'll take anything we can get and move forward and make that happen. So that was jobs in the short term. Then I want to talk a little bit about getting standing commerce up and getting it really aligned and rolling full speed on its mission. And we started the session last year, had a bill that renamed this agency from Department of Community Trade and Economic Development to Department of Commerce. I was a big fan of that change. As a marketer by training, I think that brand is a lot more powerful brand to go out and engage business. So I thought it was a good change, but the name was just a start, and the legislature directed us to go out and develop a plan about how we're going to orient this agency towards the mission of growing and improving jobs. And so we started out with some principles that I won't bore you with in detail, and then we got out on the road last summer and spent a couple of days here in the Tri-Cities, went to about 6 other cities around the state and spent 2 full days meeting with all of our partners, with small and large businesses, with local governments, with economic development professionals, with community-based organizations, with legislators. There were a whole list of folks. And the main question was, with regard to growing and improving jobs, what are our biggest opportunities as a state? And what can the state government do to help accelerate that mission? And we got a ton of feedback. And then we also put up an online survey because we realized not everybody could come sit down with us for 2 hours and talk about this, but we wanted to give them a chance to tell us what they thought. And almost 4,000 people in the middle of August found the time to fill out that survey, which was fantastic. The verbatims alone, because we allowed people to click into an area and type comments when they didn't like the questions we were asking or had something more to say. The verbatim comments alone from this survey was a document of over 200 pages. So that was a huge amount of information and feedback from the state about where we ought to focus. And so it was a lot of work to try to synthesize that. But we did that. That's what we did last fall. And the first thing we took was, from a vision statement standpoint, the Economic Development Commission had just done a big look at economic development in the state, and they had a vision statement that we thought looked pretty darn good. It talked about creating an attractive, fertile investment environment for innovation and being world-class, and just things that we thought made a ton of sense. So why reinvent a vision that's just been done and looks great? So we just took their vision and we moved on to focus on mission, which is really about operationally what you're gonna focus on and measure. And as I said, grow and improve jobs is really what we ended up with. Succinct, important, inspiring, measurable, all the things I think you need in a mission statement. And I've talked about the metrics that we've put in place to sort of assess our progress on that. And then we found 8 priorities out of synthesizing all of that feedback from the summer that we thought were the things we needed to focus on. 4 of them we call global priorities, not global in the sense of worldwide, but global in the sense of issues that apply or we think impact every employer in the state. And so, you know, if you're an employer, we think all 4 of those issues would be things that you would think were important issues. And then 4 specific priorities that subset that, you know, the mission in some important sense. And so let me just briefly say a word or two about each of these.